For 16 years, Eva Braun was the most invisible woman in Germany. She lived in the dictator's house, slept in his bed, and appeared in none of his photographs. She filmed home movies of Nazi leaders laughing by the pool while their policies starved millions. And when the end came, she did not run. She walked into a bunker and swallowed cyanide beside the man who had kept her hidden from history. Allied forces found her body and barely knew who she was. But what they never asked was far more disturbing than anything they discovered. How do you love a monster for 16 years and notice nothing? The girl who caught a dictator's eye. Eva Anna Paula Braun was 17 years old when she first met Adolf Hitler. It was October 1929, and she was working as an assistant in Heinrich Hoffmann's photography studio in Munich. Hoffmann was Hitler's personal photographer, the man who controlled every public image of the rising political figure. Eva was filing negatives and cleaning equipment when a middle-aged man with a small moustache walked in. Hoffmann introduced him as Herr Wolf. She did not know who he was, or so she later claimed. Hitler was 40 years old, twice her age, a failed artist turned political agitator who was just beginning his rise to national prominence. Eva was a convent-educated Catholic girl from a middle-class Munich family. Her father, Friedrich, was a schoolteacher who had served in World War I and harbored no particular political ambitions. Her mother, Franziska, kept a respectable home and raised 3 daughters with conventional expectations: marriage, children, domestic stability. Nothing in Eva's background suggested she would become the secret companion of the 20th century's most infamous dictator. But something happened in that photography studio. Hitler began requesting Eva specifically when he visited. He brought her flowers. He took her to the opera. He called her my beautiful Fraulein. And Eva, barely out of girlhood, was flattered by the attention of a powerful older man who treated her like she was special. Her sisters noticed the change immediately. Eva began dressing more carefully, speaking more confidently, carrying herself with a new sense of importance. She had caught the attention of someone significant, even if she could not tell anyone exactly who he was or what he did. The secrecy itself became part of the attraction. She was special. She knew something no one else knew. She had access to a world beyond the photography studio, beyond Munich, beyond anything her conventional upbringing had prepared her for. Within 2 years, she was his mistress. Within 16 years, she would be his wife. And in between, she would witness the construction of hell while sunbathing on a terrace in the Bavarian Alps. The woman who tried to die twice. Here is what most people do not know about Eva Braun's early years with Hitler. She tried to kill herself twice. The first attempt came on November 1st, 1932. Eva was 20 years old. Hitler had been ignoring her for weeks, consumed by his political campaigns and by his obsessive grief over the suicide of his niece, Geli Raubal. The relationship with Geli had been disturbing by any measure, a possessive attachment to his half-sister's daughter that many historians believe crossed into romantic or sexual territory. When Geli shot herself with Hitler's pistol in September 1931, he was devastated, and Eva, watching from the sidelines, saw her lover consumed by grief for another woman. She took her father's pistol and shot herself in the chest. The bullet lodged near her neck. She survived, barely. Hitler rushed to her bedside. He brought flowers. He promised to pay more attention. For a few months, he did. The second attempt came in May 1935. Eva swallowed an overdose of sleeping pills after Hitler again neglected her for extended periods. Her sister Ilse found her unconscious, barely breathing, surrounded by empty pill bottles. Doctors saved her life through emergency intervention, and once again, Hitler appeared at her side, contrite and attentive. This time, he gave her a house, a villa in Munich, fully furnished, with servants and a monthly allowance. The message was clear: stay quiet, stay hidden, stay loyal, and I will take care of you. But here is what those suicide attempts reveal. Eva Braun was not a naive girl who stumbled into a relationship she did not understand. She was a woman in tremendous psychological distress, desperate enough to end her own life, yet still choosing to remain with the man causing that distress. By 1935, Hitler's anti-Semitic policies were national law. The Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of citizenship. Violence against Jewish businesses was state-sanctioned. The regime's intentions were no longer ambiguous. Eva knew who Hitler was. The whole world knew who Hitler was, and she chose to stay anyway. The home movies that show everything. Eva Braun loved her camera. Between 1937 and 1944, she filmed hours of home movies at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat above the town of Berchtesgaden. These films survived the war. You can watch them today. And what they show is somehow more disturbing than any documentary footage of the regime's atrocities. They show people having fun. In Eva's films, Nazi leaders splash in swimming pools, they lounge on deck chairs, they drink champagne on sunny terraces, with the Alps rising behind them. Hermann Goering, the morphine-addicted Air Force commander, plays with his pet lion cub. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister who would later murder his own 6 children, bounces babies on his knee. Albert Speer, the architect of slave labor, discusses building plans over afternoon tea. Heinrich Himmler, the administrator of the Holocaust itself, appears in several frames, smiling and relaxed. And through it all, Eva films, laughs and waves at the camera like a hostess at a summer garden party. These were not secret meetings of war criminals. These were social gatherings of friends. Eva's friends. The inner circle of the Third Reich treated the Berghof like a country club, and Eva was its unofficial hostess. She arranged the seating, she planned the menus, she coordinated the entertainment, she made sure everyone was comfortable while, hundreds of miles away, their policies were making millions decidedly uncomfortable. The films contain no politics, no discussions of the war, no mentions of camps or deportations or mass murder, just sunshine and swimming and the sound of Eva's laughter behind the camera. The absence speaks louder than any confession ever could. What did Eva think, one wonders, when she pointed her camera at Himmler? Did she know that the smiling man in her viewfinder had signed orders that morning for the deaths of thousands? Did she care? Or had she so completely separated her social world from its political reality that such questions simply never arose? If you want to keep exploring these hidden histories with us, make sure to subscribe. We dig into stories like this every week. The woman who wasn't there. For most of Hitler's rule, Eva Braun officially didn't exist. Hitler believed a dictator should appear available to the German people, unattached, married only to the nation. This was not mere personal preference, it was calculated political strategy. The cult of personality Hitler cultivated required him to seem superhuman, above ordinary domestic concerns, devoted entirely to Germany's destiny. A girlfriend, especially a pretty young blonde who liked fashion and dancing, would have undermined that image. Eva was kept hidden from all public events. She was forbidden from appearing in photographs with Hitler. She was not permitted to attend state functions, military parades, or political rallies. When important guests visited the Berghof, Eva was instructed to stay in her room or leave the residence entirely. Foreign dignitaries, military commanders, political allies, none of them were supposed to know she existed. She complained about this constantly. Her diary entries, fragments of which survived the war, reveal a woman frustrated by her invisibility. In 1935, she wrote that she was nothing. In 1937, she wrote that he only needs me for certain purposes, otherwise I am a prisoner in a golden cage. In 1939, she wrote that when he says he loves me, he means he loves me at that particular moment, and I am nothing to him as a human being. The repeated theme was nothing, a prisoner. That is the word she used, yes. But she had the key. She could have walked out any time. She had family in Munich. She had money, provided by Hitler, but still hers to use. She had opportunities that millions of actual prisoners would have died for. And yet she stayed. She stayed through the annexation of Austria. She stayed through Kristallnacht, when Jewish shops were smashed and synagogues burned throughout Germany. She stayed through the invasion of Poland. She stayed through the final solution. She stayed through the bombing of German cities and the collapse of the Eastern Front and the suicide of hope itself in that Berlin bunker. The golden cage was unlocked the entire time. Eva chose to remain inside. The letters she should not have read. Eva Braun had access to Hitler's private quarters. She often sorted through his correspondence and personal papers when he was away, a task that gave her intimate knowledge of his daily affairs. According to testimony from Albert Speer and other members of the Inner Circle, Eva occasionally read documents she was not supposed to see. She knew about Hitler's health problems, including the tremors in his hands that would later become so pronounced. She knew about his drug dependencies, the cocktail of stimulants and sedatives that his personal physician Theodore Morell administered daily. She knew about his paranoid rages, his explosive temper, his hours-long monologues that exhausted everyone forced to listen. Did she also see reports from the East, summaries of operations, updates on the Jewish question that Hitler discussed with his deputies? We cannot know for certain, but we know that Eva was not the isolated innocent she later tried to portray. She was at the center of the regime's social world. She heard conversations at dinner tables where the most powerful men in Nazi Germany gathered. She observed visitors arriving and leaving with grave expressions. She watched Hitler's moods shift after receiving certain reports. She saw the tension rise as the war progressed and the news from the front worsened. She lived with the man for 16 years. The idea that she learned nothing about his work in all that time requires believing she possessed an almost supernatural capacity for not seeing what was directly in front of her. And maybe she did. Maybe that was exactly her skill. In January 1945, with Soviet forces advancing toward Berlin and the Third Reich crumbling, Eva Braun made a choice that defines her legacy. She could have stayed in Munich, where she would likely have survived the war. The Allies were focused on military targets and Nazi leadership, and a dictator's secret girlfriend would hardly have been a priority. She could have fled to a neutral country with the substantial funds at her disposal. Her sisters begged her to leave, to think of her own survival, to abandon the man who had hidden her for 16 years. Instead, she traveled to Berlin and descended into the Führer bunker to be with Hitler. For the next 3 months, she lived 50 feet underground, while the city above her was reduced to rubble. Soviet artillery shells shook the concrete walls. The electricity flickered. The air recyclers struggled to keep pace with the growing number of refugees crowding the bunker. And Eva, in this apocalyptic setting, threw dinner parties. She wore her best dresses. She maintained her hair and makeup with meticulous care, even as supplies ran out and staff members began disappearing. When Hitler's inner circle suggested she evacuate, she refused. She told them that she had come to die with him. There is something almost admirable about this commitment if you strip away all context. A woman so devoted to a man that she would follow him into death. It sounds romantic, tragic, operatic. But context cannot be stripped away. The man Eva was dying for had caused the deaths of tens of millions. The bunker she descended into was surrounded by a city he had destroyed. The loyal devotion she was demonstrating was devotion to the architect of the Holocaust. On April the 29th, 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun were married in a brief civil ceremony in the bunker's map room. Eva finally got what she had wanted for 16 years, the public acknowledgement of their relationship and the official status as his wife. She signed the marriage certificate, starting to write Eva Braun before crossing it out and writing Eva Hitler. It lasted approximately 40 hours. On the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Hitler shot himself. Eva bit down on a cyanide capsule. Their bodies were carried to the Reich Chancellery garden, doused in gasoline, and burned. Soviet soldiers found the charred remains days later. Eva was 33 years old. The final act of her life was also its most revealing. She did not stay because she was forced to. She stayed because she wanted to. She chose loyalty to a mass murderer over survival. She chose to die beside him rather than live without him. That choice was not the action of a naive girl who did not understand what was happening. It was the choice of a woman who understood exactly what was happening and decided it did not matter. The crime of perfect silence. Eva Braun never joined the Nazi Party. She expressed no recorded political opinions. She gave no speeches, signed no orders, commanded no troops. If complicity requires action, she was innocent. But that is not what complicity requires. Eva's crime was something quieter and, in its way, more insidious. She provided normalcy. She gave Hitler a private life that felt ordinary, a girlfriend who cared about fashion and swimming and photography, who threw parties and gossiped about celebrities and wanted nothing more than domestic contentment. In the hours he spent with Eva, Hitler was not a dictator planning genocide. He was just a man with a woman who loved him. That normalcy mattered. It mattered because it allowed Hitler to see himself as something other than what he was. It mattered because it demonstrated to his inner circle that private happiness was possible even while committing public atrocities. It mattered because every moment Eva spent making Hitler feel human was a moment that helped him continue being inhuman. She asked no hard questions. She made no moral demands. She offered no resistance, not even the passive resistance of discomfort or disapproval. She was the perfect silent partner, and her silence, as silence, had a function. It enabled. What Eva knew and when she knew it. The defenders of Eva Braun have argued for decades that she was deliberately kept ignorant of Nazi atrocities. Hitler, they claim, separated his public and private lives completely. Eva was confined to the private sphere and therefore knew nothing of the public horrors. This argument has been repeated in biographies, documentaries, and popular history so often that it has become the default understanding of Eva's role. This argument requires ignoring nearly everything we know about how she lived. Eva was present at the Berghof for countless meetings between Hitler and his top officials. She dined regularly with Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust. She socialized with Goebbels, who orchestrated the propaganda that made genocide possible. She knew Reinhard Heydrich, the primary organizer of the Final Solution, before his assassination in 1942. She knew these men. She called them by their first names. She gave them birthday presents. She photographed their children. The idea that she never heard a word about what they were doing strains credulity past the breaking point. Moreover, Eva was not stupid. She read newspapers, including foreign publications that reached the Berghof through various channels. She listened to foreign radio broadcasts which were illegal but commonly ignored in Hitler's inner circle. She heard Allied bombers overhead night after night as the war turned against Germany. She saw wounded soldiers returning from the front with haunted eyes and missing limbs. She watched Hitler's health deteriorate and his paranoia intensify as the military situation worsened. She knew something was going terribly wrong. The question is whether she chose to understand why. There is a moment captured in one of her home movies from 1939. Eva is filming guests at the Berghof when the camera briefly catches a newspaper headline visible on a table. The headline references anti-Jewish policies. Eva pans away quickly, refocusing on the flowers. That brief pan away might be the most honest moment in all her surviving footage. She saw. She looked away. That was her method for 16 years. The woman history forgot to judge. When the war ended and the tribunals began, Eva Braun was already dead. She escaped the reckoning that other Nazi wives faced. Magda Goebbels killed herself and her children in that same bunker hours after Eva's death. Emmy Goring was tried and imprisoned. Margaret Himmler underwent denazification hearings that stretched for years. Ilse Koch, the Witch of Buchenwald, was tried and convicted for her active participation in concentration camp atrocities. But Eva was just ashes in a Berlin garden, beyond the reach of justice or judgment. This accident of timing has shaped how we remember her ever since. Without a trial, there was no official verdict. Without testimony, there was no detailed accounting of her knowledge and actions. Without confrontation, there was no need for the historical record to grapple seriously with her role. She became a footnote, Hitler's girlfriend, a trivial figure in a catastrophic story. Eva Braun was not a monster. That is precisely the problem. She was ordinary. She wanted ordinary things: love, security, status, the attention of a powerful man. And she was willing to purchase those ordinary things at an extraordinary price, not through action but through inaction, not through cruelty but through comfort, not through hate but through the complete absence of love for anyone except herself and the man who loved no one at all. Here is what Eva Braun's life teaches us about how atrocities actually function. They do not require universal malice. They do not demand that every participant be a true believer. They only require enough people willing to look away, enough people choosing comfort over conscience, enough people deciding that their private happiness matters more than public horror. Eva's home movies are still watchable today. You can find them online, digitized and archived and commented on by millions of viewers. What strikes you watching them 8 decades later is how genuinely happy everyone looks. These are not people performing for the camera. They are people enjoying themselves, swimming, laughing, eating well, living beautifully in mountain air while their government murdered millions. That is the horror. Not that they were different from us, but that they were not different at all. They were people who wanted nice things and found ways to have them. People who preferred not to think too hard about where those nice things came from. People who discovered that it is possible to live very pleasantly indeed if you simply refuse to look beyond your immediate surroundings. Eva Braun did not pull any triggers, she did not sign any death warrants, she did not run any camps. By the narrowest legal definition, she was innocent of any crime. But she spent 16 years making life pleasant for a man who was making life impossible for millions. She provided comfort to evil, she domesticated horror, she made genocide feel, at least to one man, like just another thing that happened at the office while home remained a haven. That is not nothing. That is something very specific and very damaging. It is the crime of making the unbearable bearable, the crime of cushioning the conscience of a killer, the crime of perfect, enabling silence, the body they almost did not identify. When Soviet soldiers found Eva Braun's burned remains in the Reich Chancellery garden, they initially did not know who she was. The bodies had been partially destroyed by fire and then by Soviet artillery that landed nearby. Her identity was only confirmed through dental records and testimony from captured bunker staff who had witnessed the final hours. For a brief moment, she achieved in death what she had spent her life pursuing: true invisibility. But history has a way of pulling people back into the light. As documents surfaced, as diaries were decoded, as witnesses testified, Eva's role came into sharper focus, not as a perpetrator, but as something the post-war world struggled to categorize. What do you call someone who commits no crime, but enables countless crimes? What justice applies to someone who hurts no one directly, but makes hurting easier for someone who does? The Nuremberg trials had no category for Eva Braun. The denazification courts could not have processed her case. She fit no existing framework for guilt, and perhaps that is the most unsettling thing about her story. Our systems of justice, then and now, struggle to address the kind of complicity she represents. The complicity of proximity without participation, the complicity of benefit without action, the complicity of love without questions. We can prosecute the people who pull triggers. We can punish the people who give orders, but we have no mechanism for holding accountable the people who simply make the people who pull triggers comfortable at the end of the day. What remains? Eva Braun's grave is unmarked. After Soviet forces recovered her body, it was buried and reburied multiple times as political circumstances shifted. Soviet leadership initially wanted to preserve the remains for propaganda purposes, then changed their minds as the Cold War intensified. In 1970, the KGB reportedly exhumed her remains along with Hitler's and several others, cremated them completely, and scattered the ashes in the Biederitz River. There is no memorial. There is no headstone. There is nothing physical left of her at all. And yet she persists. She persists in those home movies, smiling behind the camera. She persists in the photographs she took, now archived in museums and private collections around the world. She persists in the questions her life forces us to ask. She persists every time we wonder how ordinary people accommodate themselves to extraordinary evil. Every time we notice someone looking away from injustice because confronting it would be inconvenient. Every time we see comfort chosen over conscience. She persists. Eva Braun wanted to be invisible. She succeeded for a while, but invisibility is not innocence. Sometimes it is just guilt that has not been seen yet. She spent 16 years perfecting the art of not seeing. The least we can do is see her clearly now. There is a final detail about Eva Braun that rarely gets mentioned. In 1944, as the Reich was clearly collapsing, her sister Gretel married Hermann Fegelein, a senior SS officer who served as Himmler's liaison to Hitler. Fegelein was directly involved in SS operations on the Eastern Front, operations that included mass executions of Jews and other civilians. He had commanded cavalry units that participated in some of the earliest massacres of the Holocaust. He was, by any measure, a war criminal. Eva socialized with Fegelein regularly. She helped plan his wedding to her sister. She considered him family. She brought him into her inner circle and treated him as a brother-in-law, not as a mass murderer. Whatever compartmentalization allowed Eva to love Hitler also allowed her to accept Fegelein. In April 1945, Fegelein tried to desert. As the bunker situation became increasingly desperate, he slipped away and was found in civilian clothes in his Berlin apartment, apparently planning to flee. He was caught, stripped of his rank, and executed on Hitler's orders, likely with Eva's knowledge if not her approval. Her own brother-in-law shot for cowardice, and still Eva remained. Still, she chose loyalty to Hitler over every other tie. Still, she walked into that bunker and swallowed that capsule. Whatever Eva told herself about what she knew and did not know, her final weeks make the self-deception impossible to sustain. By April 1945, she knew. She knew about the camps, she knew about the murders, she knew about the war crimes and the atrocities and the millions of dead. The whole world knew. Allied forces were liberating concentration camps and broadcasting what they found. And knowing, she chose to die beside the man responsible rather than live in a world that would hold him accountable. That choice is her confession, not to any specific crime, but to something perhaps more damning. The complete moral emptiness at the center of her 16 years with Hitler. She loved him. She really, truly loved him. Her love was so total, so consuming, so utterly divorced from any moral framework that she preferred death with a monster to life without one. After the war, thousands of photographs from Eva Braun's personal collection were discovered. Most showed exactly what you would expect: parties, vacations, posed portraits, the visual record of a woman documenting her privileged life. But some photographs were kept classified for decades, images deemed too sensitive for public release, images that showed the private lives of Nazi leaders in contexts that might humanize them. The photographs were hidden for a reason. The concern was understandable. How do you publish photos of mass murderers playing with their children? How do you release images of architects of genocide looking like ordinary people enjoying ordinary pleasures? The fear was that such images might generate sympathy and might complicate the clear moral narratives the post-war world needed to maintain. But that discomfort is precisely why Eva Braun's photographs matter. They show us what we do not want to see, that evil does not always look evil, that people who do monstrous things can appear perfectly normal, that the same hands that signed death warrants also held champagne glasses, petted dogs, and embraced loved ones. The photographs Eva took are disturbing not because they show horror, but because they do not. They show how horror can coexist with ordinary human happiness, separated only by the choice not to look too closely. The most damning thing about Eva Braun. In all the surviving documents, diaries, letters, films, and photographs from Eva Braun's 16 years with Hitler, there is not a single recorded instance of her expressing moral concern about any policy of the Third Reich. Not one moment of documented doubt. Not one question about the treatment of Jews. Not one objection to the war. Not one expression of sympathy for victims. Nothing. Perhaps such moments existed and simply were not recorded. Perhaps she had private doubts she never committed to paper. We cannot know for certain what Eva thought in the privacy of her own mind. But the absence of any moral engagement in her documented life tells its own story. It suggests a woman who either agreed with everything the regime did, or who so thoroughly compartmentalized her existence that agreement was not necessary. Either possibility is damning. Either she was a true believer who hid her beliefs behind a mask of apolitical femininity, or she was so committed to her own comfort that she eliminated all moral response from her emotional range. The woman who felt everything for Hitler felt nothing for his victims. The woman who cried over her separation from her lover shed no recorded tears for the families separated forever in the camps. This is not the crime of commission. It is the crime of omission, so complete that it becomes its own form of participation. Eva Braun did not need to hate anyone. She just needed to love no one except herself and the man who destroyed millions of lives. And that, in the arithmetic of atrocity, was more than enough. Final thoughts. Eva Braun has been dead for 80 years. Her body is scattered atoms in a German river. Her possessions are in museums or private collections. Her home movies play on YouTube, commented on by people who were not born until decades after her death. She has become what she always wanted to be, a historical curiosity rather than a moral actor. The pretty girlfriend, the tragic romantic, the woman who loved the wrong man. But that framing is a lie she spent her whole life constructing. Eva Braun was not a victim of love. She was a beneficiary of genocide who paid for her comfort with moral blindness. She was not trapped by circumstance. She was enabled by choice every day for 16 years, until the final choice that ended her life. The horrifying crime of Eva Braun was not murder. It was not ordering death, designing camps, or signing warrants. Her crime was smaller and in some ways more universal. She discovered that you can live very comfortably next to evil if you simply decide not to see it. She proved that such blindness is not passive, it is a skill. It takes practice, it requires constant, active choices about where to point the camera and where to look away. Every time you watch her home movies, you see those choices being made. Every smile, every laugh, every sunny afternoon by the pool is a choice to film that instead of acknowledging what was happening. The cumulative weight of those choices, multiplied across 16 years and hundreds of hours of footage, is a document of complicity more damning than any confession. Eva Braun wanted history to see her as a woman in love. Instead, history should see her as a warning of how easily comfort becomes complicity, of how completely love can eliminate conscience, of how the worst atrocities in human history were made possible not just by monsters, but by the ordinary people who made monsters feel at home. Thanks for watching. If you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, check out one of the videos on screen. I think you'll find it just as disturbing.